3 professional assassins, a billionaire CEO, and a janitor nobody even looked at. They had a perfect plan, except for one thing they couldn't account for. The man pushing the mop cart at the end of that hallway had once been a living weapon in the U.S. Navy. And that morning, his daughter had just texted him a picture, the smile of a 9-year-old holding a ribbon. That was the only reason he needed it. If you want to know what happens when the wrong people choose the wrong building, watch until the end. Like and comment the name of the city you're watching so I know how far this story has progressed. The elevator doors opened at 7:14 in the morning, and Logan West stepped out onto the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower with a mop bucket that had a squeaky left wheel. He already knew about the squeaky wheel. He'd known about it for 6 weeks. He kept meaning to fix it, and he kept not fixing it because somewhere between dropping Sadie off at school and clocking in at 6:15 and getting the supply closet unlocked and making sure the floor crew had what they needed before he even started his own section, it just never made it to the top of the list. The wheel squeaked. Nobody complained. Nobody really noticed Logan either, which was more or less the arrangement he preferred. He guided the cart past the row of glass-walled offices that lined the north side of the floor. The executive suite, they called it, though Logan had always thought suite was a generous word for what was essentially a very expensive hallway with better carpet. The carpet up here was different from the floors below, thicker. A deep charcoal gray that hid footprints better and probably cost more per square foot than Logan's monthly rent. He paused near the supply closet at the end of the hall, checking the inventory sheet clipped to the side of his cart. Restroom supplies for the executive bathrooms. Window cleaner for the conference room overlooking downtown. 2 replacement bulbs for the track lighting in the foyer. One had been flickering for 3 days and he'd put in the maintenance request twice. But facilities management moved at its own pace, and there wasn't much he could do to hurry it along. He started with the windows. The conference room had a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass that faced east, and in the morning the light came in low and hard and caught every fingerprint and smear left behind from the previous day's meetings. Logan sprayed and wiped in slow, methodical arcs, the kind of motion that becomes automatic after enough repetitions that you stop thinking about it, and your mind goes somewhere else entirely. This morning, it went to Sadie. She'd been nervous at breakfast, quiet in the way she got when something was sitting on her chest that she hadn't figured out how to say yet. She'd picked at her toast and asked twice whether he thought the judges for the science fair ribbon competition were fair, and Logan had told her honestly that he didn't know the judges personally, but that he'd seen her project and it was genuinely the best thing he'd seen involving a potato and electrical current since, well, ever. Because he'd never actually seen anything involving a potato and electrical current before. She'd laughed at that. A real laugh, not the polite one she gave when she was being kind to him. He hoped she was okay. He always hoped she was okay. It was the background frequency of his entire life, the constant low hum underneath everything else. Is Sadie okay? Is Sadie safe? Is Sadie happy? And he had learned to function normally while it played, the way you learn to sleep through traffic noise after living in the city long enough. Logan moved to the second window panel and kept wiping. Look. By 8:30, the executive floor was filling up. The assistants came first, as they always did. Organized, efficient, already pulling up calendars and queuing messages before their computers had fully loaded. Then the senior vice presidents, most of them with coffee cups and the slightly compressed expression of people who had already been on 2 calls before arriving at the office. Then the executives themselves, filtering in from the elevator bank in 1s and 2s, the ones who mattered wearing it in the particular way that people who know they matter tend to wear it. Not loudly, but with a kind of settled weight, like they'd stopped needing to prove anything to anyone in this building a long time ago. Logan had watched people his whole career. In another life, in another uniform, watching people had been the difference between completing a mission and not coming home at all. Now he watched them out of habit, the same way some people crack their knuckles or check their phone, reflexively, without much intention behind it. He noticed things. He always noticed things. He noticed that the man in the corner office, Hargrove, CFO, according to the nameplate, had started coming in 15 minutes later over the past 3 weeks, which meant either his commute had changed or something in his personal life had shifted his mornings. He noticed that 2 of the executive assistants had stopped eating lunch together around the same time, which suggested a falling out of some kind. He noticed which doors got left open and which ones were always shut, which executives made eye contact with the cleaning staff, and which ones looked straight through them like they were part of the furniture. He had noticed Claire Whitmore the first week he started working the executive floor. Not because she was the CEO, he'd looked that up later when a coworker mentioned it, but because she was the only person on the entire 42nd floor who had ever said good morning to him and actually waited for the response. Not the busy stride version of good morning that people deploy when they want to seem friendly without losing momentum, but a real one. She'd been standing at the coffee station, waiting for the machine to finish brewing, and he'd come past with his cart, and she'd said, "Good morning, Logan, right? I always see your name on the maintenance log." He'd said good morning back, and she'd nodded and looked at the cart and asked if the squeaky wheel drove him crazy. He'd said it was growing on him. She'd smiled and gone back to watching the coffee brew. That had been 6 weeks ago. Since then, they'd exchanged maybe 30 words total in passing. She was busy in a way that Logan recognized as genuine rather than performed. The kind of busy where you could see the actual weight of it in how someone moved, in the slight delay between a question and an answer, because 3 other thoughts were already running. She ran board meetings and investor calls and acquisition negotiations, and did it all in heels that Logan privately thought looked like instruments of torture, though he supposed that wasn't really his business. She was sharp. She was fair. Her staff, the ones who had been there long enough to know the difference, seemed to respect her rather than just tolerate her. Logan didn't think about her much beyond that. She was part of the landscape of this floor, like the expensive carpet and the flickering track light he still needed to replace. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Logan knew this because the conference room prep was on his morning checklist. Fresh water pitchers, clean glasses, the whiteboard erased, the projector cables checked. And he'd done all of it by 8:45 before quietly retreating to the hallway with his cart. He was changing the flickering bulb in the track lighting near the foyer when he heard the elevator open. He didn't look up immediately. Elevators opened all morning, but something in his peripheral awareness registered that the doors had opened and no one had walked out yet, which was the kind of small wrong note that he'd trained himself to hear even when he was consciously focused on something else. He finished seating the bulb, then glanced toward the elevator bank. 3 men, dark clothing, nothing unusual about that. Business casual, you could call it, except for the fact that none of them were looking at their phones or at each other or at the floor the way people do when they step off an elevator in an unfamiliar place. They were looking outward, all 3 of them, immediately and simultaneously, triangulating the space. Logan looked back at the light fixture. His hands continued working. His brain had gone very quiet in the way it only went quiet when it was actually very loud underneath. Military. Not necessarily active, not necessarily American, but the way those 3 men had moved out of the elevator, the spread, the angles, the immediate environmental assessment, that wasn't civilian behavior. That was trained behavior. Someone had drilled that into them long enough that it had become the body's default language. Logan replaced the cover plate on the light fixture and stepped down from the small step stool, picking up his tools slowly, not hurrying. He moved his cart toward the supply closet, which gave him a reason to walk across the foyer at a natural pace, which gave him a chance to look at the 3 men more carefully without appearing to look at them at all. The tallest one, 6'2", maybe 6'3", heavy through the shoulders, had moved to a position near the elevator bank where he could see both the main hallway and the emergency stairwell door simultaneously. He wasn't consulting a phone or checking an appointment. He was standing in a way that Logan knew from experience was called holding a position. The second man, shorter and compact, had drifted toward the reception desk where the executive floor assistant was just arriving at her station. He was asking her something. His body language was relaxed. His eyes were not. The third man was moving slowly down the main hallway, hands in his jacket pockets, pace unhurried, like someone who was mildly lost and looking for a name on a door. Logan put his hand on his cart and stood still for a moment near the supply closet door. 3 men. One on the exit, one on the reception, one moving through the floor. He thought about the board meeting. 9 o'clock. Every senior executive in the company in one room for 2 hours. He thought about the security desk. The security desk at the elevator bank was empty. Marcus, the morning guard who was usually in that chair by 8:15 without fail, was not there. Logan had noticed it when he arrived and thought Marcus was probably in the restroom. Now he was thinking something different. He unlocked the supply closet and went inside and stood in the dark for a moment with his hand on the shelf and his eyes open. Think. He was a janitor. He was 32 years old. He had a daughter in 4th grade who was nervous about a science fair ribbon and had kissed him on the cheek this morning before running toward the school entrance because she'd spotted her best friend near the flagpole. He was a man who had made a decision 4 years ago in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and machinery, with his wife's hand in his and a chaplain somewhere in the hallway. He'd made a decision that the person who came before could stay in that room, that the person who walked out could be someone else, someone quieter, someone who would be home every night and coach Little League badly and learn to cook something better than scrambled eggs and be there, be just there, in the ordinary, consistent way that Sadie needed someone to be there. He had honored that decision every single day for 4 years. He pulled out his phone and looked at it. The last message from Sadie was from 22 minutes ago, a photo. She was holding a ribbon, a blue one. First place, it looked like. Her grin was enormous and slightly gap-toothed on the left side where she'd lost a molar 2 weeks ago. Her message said, "I won, Dad! They gave it to me in homeroom." Miss Keller said my project was exceptionally creative. I had to look up what exceptionally meant. Logan looked at that photo for 4 seconds. Then he put his phone back in his pocket and opened the supply closet door. Trapped. The second man, the compact one who'd been talking to the reception assistant, was now standing differently near the desk. The assistant, a young woman named Priya who always said thank you when Logan left fresh supplies in the kitchen, was sitting very still with a quality of stillness that Logan recognized. She was frightened. She'd been told to stay quiet, and she was obeying because she was smart enough to know that it was the right call, but her hands were folded on the desk in a way that was too careful, too deliberate. People didn't sit that still unless they were working at it. Logan pushed his cart out of the supply closet and moved it slowly toward the kitchen at the far end of the hall. The third man had stopped near the entrance to the main conference room, where the board meeting had started approximately 12 minutes ago, according to Logan's mental clock. He was looking at his watch, then at the door. They're waiting for something, a signal, a window. The moment when everyone was settled and the room was locked in and the floor was, from their perspective, controlled. The tall man by the elevator had put on a pair of thin gloves. Logan kept walking. His squeaky left wheel was the only sound in the hallway that didn't belong to the sound of a building running normally, and now it seemed very loud. He reached the kitchen and turned the cart sideways, blocking the doorway the way he sometimes did when mopping, which gave him a natural reason to stand there and gave him a sight line down most of the hallway through the kitchen's pass-through window. He assessed what he had. He had a mop handle. He had a cart with a 50-pound bucket on it. He had a spray bottle of industrial glass cleaner that would, if deployed in someone's eyes, cause significant but non-permanent discomfort. He had a plastic step stool. He was also wearing rubber-soled work shoes on polished marble flooring, which was actually relevant information. What he did not have was backup. He did not have a radio. He did not have a weapon, and he'd made himself the kind of promise that meant he didn't carry one. He did not have a plan beyond the next 60 seconds, which was about as far as any real plan ever extended anyway. He did not have a reason to do this that would hold up to any reasonable standard of logic or self-interest. He had a photo of a girl with a blue ribbon on his phone. He thought about what he would tell Sadie tonight when he picked her up and she wanted to tell him everything about her day, which she always did, everything, in the overspilling way of kids who haven't learned yet to edit themselves, who trust that the person across from them actually wants to hear all of it. He thought about what he would tell her when she eventually learned what happened in this building today, because she would learn it. Kids always learn things. And she would look at him with those direct brown eyes of hers, and she would ask, "Dad, were you there?" He could not be the person who said, "Yes, I was there, and I pushed my cart to the kitchen and waited for it to be over." He couldn't do that and still be the father she thought he was, which meant that whatever came next was not a decision so much as the absence of one. He'd made the actual decision a long time ago, in pieces. Every time he'd answered yes when Sadie asked him if being brave meant helping people, even when it was scary. Logan West straightened up from behind the kitchen cart. He breathed out slowly through his nose, and he walked back into the hallway. He was about 30 feet from the conference room when Claire Whitmore came out of it. That surprised him. He'd assumed she'd be in the board meeting. She was the CEO. It was her meeting. But apparently something had pulled her out, because she came through the door with a folder in one hand and a pen in the other, and the focused expression of someone looking for a specific document they'd left on their desk. And she very nearly walked directly into the compact man who'd been standing near the conference room entrance. The compact man caught her by the arm. Not roughly, not violently, in the practiced, almost gentle way that professionals used when they wanted to move someone without causing a scene. Yet. Ms. Whitmore, his voice was low, courteous, with an accent Logan couldn't immediately place. Eastern European, maybe, or somewhere near it. Please don't be alarmed. We're going to take a short walk together. Claire looked at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at his face. To her credit, she didn't scream. She went very still in a way that told Logan she was thinking, assessing, buying time, which was the right instinct and also, under normal circumstances, the right move. These were not quite normal circumstances. "Who are you?" she said, level, good control of her voice. "That's not important right now," the compact man said. He was steering her slowly toward the elevator bank. "What's important is that you cooperate, and that everyone else in this building continues their morning without interruption." "You won't get through security in the lobby," Claire said. "We have arrangements in the lobby," the compact man said, which told Logan that this was not improvised and not small. Whoever had planned this had assets in place through multiple floors of the building, which meant resources and which meant serious people with serious intentions and a very specific target. And he was a janitor with a mop handle and rubber-soled shoes. Logan kept walking. His pace hadn't changed. His expression hadn't changed. He was just a man pushing a cart down a hallway, which was what he was every day. Which was why neither the compact man nor the tall man, who had now moved closer to the conference room door, had looked at him twice. He was 17 feet away when he caught Claire's eye. She saw him, and something happened in her face, not relief because she didn't know him well enough to feel relief at the sight of him, but a flicker of attention, the kind of look someone gives when they notice an odd thing, an inconsistency, something in the ordinary visual landscape that doesn't quite track. What she was seeing was a janitor who was walking directly toward an abduction in progress, and had not stopped or diverted and was not looking alarmed. She was trying to figure out what that meant. Logan held her gaze for just a second. Then he looked at the floor, at the polished marble, at the reflection in it, the same reflection he used every morning to check the quality of his cleaning, the reflection that now showed him the tall man by the elevator shifting his weight and the third man still near the far end of the hallway. He needed to know where all three were before anything else happened. He angled the cart to give himself a reason to look down the hallway toward the far end, and in the marble he saw the third man moving back toward the conference room, coming closer, probably because things were progressing and he needed to be in position. 12 feet. The compact man noticed Logan now. His eyes moved to Logan's cart, his uniform, his face. Filed him. Janitor, not a concern, irrelevant. Logan thought that was generous of him. 10 feet. "Excuse me," Logan said. The compact man looked at him again, slightly irritated this time. "Keep moving." "Yeah," Logan said. Just need to get past you to the supply room." He kept walking. He was 6 feet away when the compact man fully turned toward him with the beginning of something on his face. The recalibration that happened when a brain that had dismissed something started to notice it wasn't behaving like it should. And by then Logan was already inside that 6 feet, and the mop handle was already moving. What happened in the next 40 seconds was not graceful. That was the thing that the movies always got wrong. The thing Logan had tried to explain to Sadie once, when she'd asked why the fights in her cartoon shows always looked so clean and choreographed. Real violence was not clean. It was ugly and fast and loud, and the people who won weren't the ones who moved the most beautifully. They were the ones who moved most efficiently and were willing to absorb things that would stop a person who was still thinking about their own comfort. The compact man was quick. Logan had expected that. He got his hand up fast, and his response was trained. He wasn't panicking, he was reacting, which made him more dangerous than someone who was scared, but also slightly more predictable because trained responses followed patterns. Logan used the pattern. There was a collision and some broken glass. The spray bottle left Logan's hand at some point and hit the wall, and the cart went sideways with a crash that sounded enormous in the marble hallway, And the tall man from the elevator was moving now, moving fast, and someone was shouting something in a language Logan didn't speak. Claire had pressed herself against the wall. Logan had half a second to note that she'd done exactly the right thing. Not running, not screaming, not moving in a way that complicated what was happening. And then he didn't have half a second for anything except the tall man, who was very large and had significant reach, and had decided that subtlety was no longer the priority. The third man was coming from behind. Logan knew it without looking, felt the change in the air, the vibration of footsteps on the marble. He let the tall man's momentum do most of the work, because that was the thing about big men. They committed hard, and once they committed, you could use what they gave you. Logan redirected rather than blocked, kept his base low, used the slick marble and the rubber soles, and the tall man's size worked against him in a way that left him on the floor with one of the marble columns between him and any immediate follow-through. The third man reached Logan from behind and got one arm around him, and Logan felt the genuine strength of it. This one was not carrying extra weight, lean and experienced. And for a moment it was a real problem, a genuine bad moment, where Logan was thinking, I have maybe 3 seconds before this becomes something I can't fix. He used those 3 seconds, not cleanly. He took something on the left side of his face that was going to be ugly by tomorrow morning, and possibly required a conversation with the school pickup line about what happened to his eye. He felt a rib flex in a way that suggested it was going to have opinions about the next few days. His left knee hit the marble and made a sound that he mentally filed under a dress later. But the third man was on the floor, and Logan was standing. The hallway was very loud and very still at the same time. That strange quality of an aftermath, where the noise of what just happened seemed to still be hanging in the air while the actual space had gone motionless. The compact man was down near the elevator bank. The tall man was against the column, getting up slowly, making the calculation about whether it was worth trying again. The third man was on the floor behind Logan. Logan breathed. His ribs had more opinions now that he was doing it consciously. He heard the elevator and the stairwell door simultaneously. Security, finally, multiple pairs of footsteps, the particular sound of people arriving fast with purpose. And the tall man across the hallway made the last calculation and settled on the floor instead. The executive floor was suddenly full of people again. Doors had opened, faces were appearing, someone was on the phone, someone else was talking to security. The noise of a normal building reasserting itself. Logan stood next to his overturned cart in the middle of the hallway. His hands were shaking slightly. They always did, afterward. It was the adrenaline processing out. Normal physiology meant nothing. He told himself that enough times over enough years that he mostly believed it. He reached down and righted the cart. The left wheel still squeaked. The compact man sitting against the wall with 2 security officers now standing over him looked at Logan with an expression that Logan recognized. It was the look of a professional who had made a categorical error and was in the process of recategorizing. "Who the hell are you?" the man said. His accent was clearer now. Ukrainian, Logan thought, or possibly Russian. Logan picked up the fallen mop handle and set it across the cart. "I'm just a father," he said, trying to get home to his daughter. "What?" Claire Whitmore was standing against the wall with her arms crossed, which Logan had learned was how she stood when she was shaken, and didn't want anyone to know she was shaken. Her folder was still in her hand. She'd somehow held onto it through the whole thing. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, which was unusual because Logan was generally good at reading expressions. She said, "Are you hurt?" "Little bit," he said honestly. "You need a doctor." "Well, I need to finish my shift," he said, "and someone should check on Priya at the front desk. She's been scared this whole time and no one's gone to check on her." Claire turned and looked toward the reception desk, then back at Logan. Something moved through her face. "I'll go," she said, and then she added quietly, like it cost her something to say it, "Thank you." Logan nodded once. He pulled the cart toward the supply closet. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He stopped and looked at it, expecting investigators, or maybe the building manager, or someone else who was going to need him to stop moving and answer questions. It was Sadie. "Dad, are you coming to pick me up, or is Mrs. Patterson doing it today? Also, I won the ribbon. Did I tell you already?" "I think I told you already." Logan stood in the middle of the hallway of the 42nd floor of Meridian Tower, surrounded by security personnel and shaken executives and 3 men who would shortly be in police custody, and he read that message twice. He typed back, "I'm coming, wouldn't miss it. Already knew about the ribbon. You're the best scientist I know." He put the phone in his pocket. He had 3 more restrooms to restock, and a conference room that needed the water pitchers refilled before the board meeting resumed, which it probably would, eventually, once investigators cleared the floor. Logan West pushed his cart toward the supply closet. The left wheel squeaked the whole way. The investigators arrived in force at 9:47, which meant the 42nd floor went from chaotic to bureaucratically chaotic, which was somehow worse. There were at least 8 people in dark jackets with lanyards, 2 uniformed officers, and a woman in a gray blazer who hadn't introduced herself to anyone, but whom everyone instinctively stepped aside for, which told Logan she was the one who actually mattered in the room. He was sitting on the step stool he'd retrieved from the supply closet because someone had told him to stay put, and there wasn't anywhere else to sit. His ribs were making themselves known in a persistent, low-grade way that wasn't quite pain yet, but was working toward it. The left side of his face felt tight and hot. He'd caught a glimpse of it in the supply closet mirror while retrieving the stool. It was going to bruise badly, the kind of purple-yellow that would take 2 weeks to clear and would prompt Sadie to ask pointed questions he wasn't sure how to answer. The 3 men had been taken down to a holding area on the lobby level, from what Logan overheard. The building's security footage was being pulled. Priya, the reception assistant, had been checked on. Claire had gone to her first thing before the investigators arrived, before anyone else thought to, and was now in a smaller office with a cup of tea and one of the HR managers, which seemed like an appropriate arrangement. Logan sat on his step stool and waited and watched the ceiling track lighting, including the one he'd replaced that morning, which was working correctly now and probably would for another 8 months before the building cycle brought it back to his list. The woman in the gray blazer eventually made her way to him. She pulled a chair over from a nearby desk, not asking permission, just taking it, which was the move of someone who took chairs and rooms and conversations without needing to ask, and sat down across from him at a height that put them roughly eye level, which he suspected was deliberate. "Logan West," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Detective Sandra Reyes." She had a small notebook, the paper kind, which Logan respected. "I've looked at the preliminary footage. I want to hear your account before I form any strong opinions about what I'm looking at." "Okay," Logan said. "Walk me through it, from when you first noticed them." He did. He kept it factual and sequential, the same way he'd been trained to deliver after-action reports. What he observed, when he observed it, what he assessed, what he did. He didn't editorialize and he didn't pad it. Reyes took notes without interrupting, which was the sign of an interviewer who was actually listening rather than waiting to talk. When he finished, she looked at her notes for a moment. "You identified military training from elevator body language," she said. "Tactical positioning, yes. And you have training that allowed you to make that assessment." It wasn't quite a question. He'd known this was coming. "I was Navy," he said. She waited. "SEAL program," he said. 8 years. I've been out for 4. Reyes wrote something down. "Why didn't you call security?" "Security post was unmanned. I didn't have a radio. By the time I'd found a phone, they would have had Miss Whitmore in the elevator." "You could have called 911. "Yes," he said, and then waited 3 to 7 minutes, which is a long time in that situation. Reyes considered this. She didn't push it, which told him she agreed with the math, even if she wasn't going to say so. "The 3 individuals in custody," she said, "are not going to be cooperative. We're running their prints and it's going to take some time to establish who sent them and why. What I need to know from you," she paused, looked at him directly, "is whether you have any reason to believe you were targeted, whether this was about the building or the company, or whether there's any possibility it was about you specifically." Logan looked at her. "I'm a janitor," he said. "You were a Navy SEAL 4 years ago." "People carry histories," Reyes said. Not unkindly. "I need to ask." "I'm not carrying anything that would make me a target for a 3-man extraction team in a corporate building," Logan said. "Whatever this was, it was about Meridian and Ms. Whitmore. I just happened to be there." Reyes held his gaze for a moment, then wrote something in her notebook and closed it. "I'm going to need you available for follow-up. Don't leave the city. I'm picking my daughter up from school at 3:15. Logan said. I'll be available after that. Something moved in Reyes's expression. Not quite a smile, but a recognition of something. She stood and picked up her chair to return it. Get your ribs looked at, she said, and your face. After 3:15, Logan said. She shook her head once, not disapproving, just noting it, and moved back into the organized chaos of the investigation. Logan sat on his step stool and wished he had coffee. He also checked his phone, a reflex he'd developed 4 years ago and never broken. And there was nothing new from Sadie, which meant she was in class, which meant everything was fine on that front, which was the front that mattered most. He put the phone away and looked at his cart, overturned earlier and now righted by one of the security officers who'd apparently felt the need to do something useful with his hands. The mop had come off the side bracket and was lying separately on the floor. The spray bottle of glass cleaner was broken, a small puddle of blue liquid still spreading slowly on the marble near the wall. Logan looked at the puddle and thought about whether there was another spray bottle in the supply closet, because that window in the conference room wasn't going to clean itself. Then he thought that probably the conference room was a crime scene now, and the windows were someone else's problem for the day. He had worked in enough intense situations to know that the minutes directly after something was over were the most dangerous for the mind. Not the body, which had adrenaline's exit ramp to manage, but the mind, which could go places if you let it off its leash. He'd learned to keep it busy. Practical things. Specific, immediate things. The broken spray bottle. The water pitchers in the conference room that still needed refilling, though probably not today. The maintenance request he needed to resubmit about the elevator track seal on the 38th floor, which had been grinding for 2 weeks and no one had addressed. He stayed with those things and let the noise of the investigation wash around him and waited. It was the building manager, Dennis Holt, who finally brought him coffee. Dennis was a 55-year-old man who'd run building operations for 11 years and wore the expression of someone who had seen most things, but not, until today, quite this particular thing. He handed Logan a cup from the executive kitchen, good coffee, the real stuff, not the break room blend, and stood next to him for a moment without saying anything, which Logan appreciated. Then Dennis said, "You didn't tell me." Logan looked at him. "Tell you what? What you used to be." "You asked if I had prior work experience in facilities management," Logan said. "I told you I'd done shift work and had strong attention to detail. Both of those things are true." Dennis made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He was looking at the hallway, at the investigators, at the 3 scuff marks on the marble that were going to need a specific cleaner to address properly. "I've had this building for 11 years, he said. "Nothing like this has ever happened. Statistically, it probably won't happen again." "That's not as comforting as you might think." Dennis drank his own coffee. "Are you going to be okay?" The question surprised Logan slightly because Dennis was not a man who asked that kind of question as a rule. He was operational, practical, schedule-oriented. The personal register wasn't his natural frequency. "Yeah," Logan said. "I'm going to be okay." "Your face looks rough." "I know. Workers' comp covers that, you know. The injury. I can walk you through the paperwork." After 3:15, Logan said. Dennis looked at him. "You keep saying that." "I'm picking up my daughter." Dennis nodded slowly, like a man filing information into the correct folder. "Right," he said. "Okay." He finished his coffee. "I'm going to need to deal with 37 things at once for the next several hours. Will you be all right sitting here?" "I'll be fine," Logan said. Dennis nodded once more, in the way of someone who wanted to say something else and had decided against it, and went back to his 37 things. Logan drank his coffee. It was good. He made a note to find out what brand it was. He was halfway through the cup when Claire Whitmore appeared at the edge of the hallway and walked directly toward him with the focused stride of someone who had been interrupted twice already on her way to doing this and was not going to be interrupted a third time. She stopped in front of him. She'd changed her jacket. The original one had been torn at the shoulder when the compact man grabbed her soul. And her hair was slightly different, like she'd made a quick attempt to reset it and mostly succeeded. She was holding her own coffee, which she hadn't touched, and she looked like she'd aged 3 years in the past 2 hours, which was the honest truth of what serious stress did to a face. "You should be with the investigators," Logan said. "I've been with the investigators for 90 minutes, Claire said. "I've told them everything I know 3 times. She looked at his face. That's going to be a serious bruise. I've been told. She pulled over another chair. Everyone on this floor apparently felt entitled to move the furniture today, and sat down. Not at a professional distance. Close enough that she was genuinely talking to him rather than performing a conversation. I want to ask you something, she said, and I'd like an honest answer. I'll try. Did you know what you were going to do before you walked out of that supply closet? Logan thought about that. He thought about the honest answer, which was more complicated than a simple yes or no. I knew what was happening, he said. I knew what my options were. I didn't have a plan exactly, more like a direction. And the direction was toward 3 armed men. The direction was toward you, Logan said. The 3 men were in the way. Claire looked at him for a moment, and he couldn't quite tell what she was thinking, which continued to be unusual for him. Why? She said. The words sat there between them. Simple, direct, the kind of question that sounds small and opens into something large. Logan looked at his coffee cup. My daughter thinks courage means protecting people when it's the right thing to do, he said. She told me that about 8 months ago. She was reading a book about a dog that saved someone in a lake, and she stopped and looked at me very seriously and said, Dad, that's what being brave is, right? You help people even when it's scary. What did you say? I said yes, because it's true. He turned the cup in his hands. And I've never been able to lie to her, even when it would be easier. She has a way of looking at you that makes lying feel impossible. She gets it from her mother. Claire was quiet for a moment. What does she know about what you used to do? Not the specifics. She knows I was in the Navy. She knows I was in some situations that were dangerous. She knows I left because I wanted to be home with her. He paused. She doesn't know the extent of it. She's 9. But she gave you the definition of courage anyway, Claire said. Kids are like that, Logan said. They figure out the important things without needing all the context. Claire set her untouched coffee down on the floor beside her chair. She pressed her hands together, interlaced her fingers, and Logan noticed that her hands weren't entirely steady. She was holding herself together through willpower and structure and probably a lot of practice, and the effort was small but visible if you knew where to look. I'm not good at this, she said. At what? She stopped. I'm used to being the person who manages situations. In a boardroom, I know what I'm doing. I can read a room. I know how to control a negotiation. I know when to push and when to let something sit. Today, I stood against a wall and watched someone else handle a situation that was happening to me, and I couldn't do anything about it. And that's... She didn't finish the sentence. That's not a weakness, Logan said. I know that intellectually. Knowing it intellectually and believing it are different things, he said. You did the right thing. You stayed still. You didn't complicate it. You didn't run when running would have made things worse. That's not nothing. You didn't need me to do anything. I needed you to not get hit, he said. You managed that. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, too soon, and she wasn't the kind of person who reached for relief too quickly, but a slight releasing of something that had been locked. You're different than I expected, she said. What did you expect? I don't know. More presentation, maybe. More of an identity around it. The quiet janitor who's secretly a trained killer that seems like it should come with a certain amount of... She searched for the word. Mystique? Logan said. Something like that. I'm tired, Logan said simply. Mystique takes energy I'd rather put elsewhere. She looked at him, and this time he could read her expression. It was the look of someone genuinely reassessing something, turning a piece over in their hands and finding new angles on it. Where'd you serve? She asked. If that's okay to ask. It's okay. Multiple deployments, Afghanistan mostly, some other places that required a certain amount of discretion about the geography. When did you leave? The question touched the edge of something that Logan didn't open often. He answered it because she'd asked directly and because she'd earned some honesty from him today. My wife died, he said, 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, 14 months from diagnosis to... He stopped, started again. Sadie was 5. I was on a deployment when we found out. I finished the deployment because that was what the situation required. And I came home, And I spent 8 months watching my wife fight something that didn't care how strong she was, and then she was gone. He looked at the wall across from him. I couldn't be in 2 places at once anymore. I had to choose a place. I chose Sadie. Claire didn't say she was sorry, which he appreciated. Most people said they were sorry, and he knew they meant it and he didn't resent it, but it sat on top of the thing rather than engaging with it, and sometimes the lack of it was more honest. She sounds like a good kid, Claire said. She's the best thing I've ever done, Logan said. And I don't say that to be poetic. I just mean it's factually accurate. My whole career, every operation I was part of, everything I trained for, and none of it compares to what I feel when she comes running out of school. Not even close. Claire picked up her coffee and finally took a drink, and Logan thought she needed a moment with that, with the image of it, with whatever it connected to in her own history. I don't have kids, she said, not like she was making an announcement, just noting a fact. I've been told this company is my child, which I've always found to be a slightly insulting metaphor. Companies can't run out of school, Logan said. No, Claire said. They definitely cannot. There was a pause that wasn't uncomfortable, the kind that settled between 2 people who've been through something together and don't need to fill every second of it. Then one of the investigators called Claire's name from across the floor, and she stood, and she looked down at Logan with the straightforward gaze of someone who said things when they meant them and not otherwise. I meant what I said before, she said. Thank you. I know that word doesn't... I know it's not enough, but I mean it as much as I can mean it. You don't owe me anything, Logan said. That's not why I'm saying it, she said. She held his gaze for a second longer, then turned and walked toward the investigator and back into the machinery of the aftermath. Logan sat on his step stool with his coffee and his sore ribs and his bruised face and thought about Sadie waiting at school, probably vibrating with news about the ribbon and whatever else had happened in 4th grade today, and the thought of it was so ordinary and so good that it was almost painful. He checked his phone. 2:41. He had 34 minutes before he needed to leave. He stood carefully. The ribs expressed their continued opinions, and picked up his mop from the floor and reattached it to the cart bracket. He looked at the blue puddle of spilled glass cleaner, which had spread a little further and was going to stain the grout between the marble tiles if it sat much longer. He went to the supply closet and found a second spray bottle and the grout cleaner and a specific cloth he used for this type of spill, and he came back and crouched down slowly, everything slow, respecting the ribs, and started cleaning up the mess. One of the officers nearby was watching him with an expression that suggested he found this remarkable in some way. Logan didn't find it remarkable. The mess was there. He had the supplies to address it. The marble was his responsibility. He cleaned it up and stood and brought the materials back to the supply closet and closed the door and looked at the hallway for a moment, at the investigators still working, at the executives behind their office doors doing whatever executives did when their morning had gone violently sideways, at the reception desk where Priya was now back in her chair and was talking quietly on the phone to someone, probably a family member from the look of it. At 2:49, he found Dennis and told him he was leaving at 3 o'clock to pick up his daughter and would be available by phone for anything the investigators needed. Dennis, who was on his own phone and managing something that looked complicated, gave him a look that was part acknowledgement and part something harder to name. Some kind of reckoning, maybe, with the fact that the most capable person on the floor today had been on his cleaning staff, and nodded. At 2:58, Logan West took off his work gloves and set them on the cart and walked to the elevator. He pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. The elevator descended smoothly, indifferent to the events of the morning, operating on its own uncomplicated logic. Logan looked at himself in the elevator's mirrored wall. The bruise was coming in dark on the left cheekbone, and there was a small cut near his eyebrow he hadn't noticed until now, dried but visible. His uniform was torn at the left shoulder, an area he didn't remember damaging but evidently had. He looked like a man who'd been in a fight, which was accurate. Sadie was going to have questions. He was going to have to be careful about how he answered them, which was a problem he was familiar with and hadn't entirely solved in 4 years. She was 9 and she was sharp, and the gap between what she could handle and what she needed to be protected from was narrower now than it had been when she was 5, and he was never entirely sure where the line was. He'd figure it out in the car. He usually did. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. The lobby was significantly more populated than it would normally be at this hour. More officers, building personnel, a news van visible through the exterior glass that Logan noted with a kind of tired resignation. The story was out, or some version of it was. He moved through the lobby with his head slightly down, which wasn't evasion exactly, more habit. The habit of a man who had made a life out of being in a room without being noticed, who had recalibrated his entire presence after 8 years of being someone whose presence was a weapon, and who found the lower register genuinely more comfortable now than the alternative. He pushed through the exterior door. The afternoon was bright and cold, the kind of October brightness that felt cleaner than summer, and the street noise after the controlled environment of the building was a slight shock, the way it always was. Traffic and voices and a food cart somewhere near the corner sending coffee smell in every direction. Logan put his hands in his jacket pockets and started walking toward the parking structure 2 blocks south where he kept his car, an 8-year-old Honda that Sadie had named Gerald for reasons she'd explained once and Logan had never fully retained. He had 22 minutes to get to school. His ribs hurt. His face hurt. His knee, which had made that sound on the marble, was stiffer than he'd like. He felt the specific exhaustion that came not from physical exertion, but from the intensity of being fully, completely awake for an extended period. The kind of alert that burned a different fuel than ordinary tiredness, and the coming down from it was a full-body gravity. He thought about calling his sister, then decided against it. She would worry, and the worry would turn into questions. And the questions would be hard to answer from a parking structure 2 blocks from a building where he'd just become someone's news story. He'd call her tomorrow. He thought about the compact man's question, "Who the hell are you?" and the answer he'd given, and whether it was true. It was true. It was the truest thing he knew how to say about himself. Everything else, the training, the deployments, the years of being a different kind of person in a different kind of uniform, all of that was history. And history didn't define you unless you let it. What defined you was what you chose every morning when the alarm went off and you had to decide again who you were going to be today. He chose Sadie's father. He chose it every day. Today had been a more complicated version of that choice, but it was the same choice at its center. He reached Gerald the Honda and unlocked it and sat down carefully inside. The seat was adjusted to his height, and there was a small stuffed elephant named Humphrey wedged between the passenger seat and the center console, because Sadie occasionally forgot things in the car, and this was a long-term resident. There was a half-finished juice box in the cup holder that was definitely not his. Logan sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. His hands weren't shaking anymore. He started the car and pulled out of the parking structure into the October afternoon, and he drove toward Ridgeline Elementary School where his daughter was waiting with a blue ribbon and more words than she'd have time to say before dinner. He turned on the radio. Some pop song he didn't know. He left it on anyway. He had 16 minutes. He was going to make it. Sadie was waiting on the front steps of Ridgeline Elementary with her backpack on her lap and her ribbon pinned to her jacket when Logan pulled Gerald into the pickup line at 3:18, 3 minutes later than usual, which she noticed immediately. She noticed most things. She was off the steps and at the car before he'd fully stopped, the way she always was, backpack bouncing, ribbon catching the afternoon light, and she pulled the door open and threw herself into the passenger seat and began talking before she'd even gotten her seatbelt on. "Dad, okay, so Miss Keller announced it in homeroom and everyone clapped, but Marcus Chen said his project was better, which it was not, because his was just a baking soda volcano, which everyone has done since basically kindergarten, and also..." She stopped. She looked at his face. The stopping was total, the way only kids could stop. No transition, no social grace to smooth the gear change, just complete and immediate attention redirected. "Dad," she said, "what happened to your face?" Logan had rehearsed 3 different versions of this answer on the drive over. None of them had survived contact with her direct brown eyes. "I had a situation at work," he said. "What kind of situation?" "A complicated one." He pulled forward in the pickup line because the car behind him had given a small, polite tap of the horn. "How about you tell me more about Marcus Chen's volcano first?" "Dad?" Her voice had gone to a register he recognized, the one she used when she knew he was deflecting, and she was not going to accept it. She'd developed this register sometime around age 7 and had refined it considerably since. "Your face is purple." It's not purple yet. It'll be purple tomorrow. What happened? He pulled out of the school lot and onto Ridgeline Avenue and drove for a moment without answering, which was also a tell, and he knew it. Someone tried to hurt a person at my building today, he said, and I stopped them. Sadie was quiet. This was the other register, the one that was harder to read. The quiet that meant she was processing something at full capacity and he should wait. Were they trying to hurt you? She said finally. Not at first. It became mutual. Is the other person okay? The one they were trying to hurt? Yes, she's fine. Sadie filed that. How many people? Sadie, how many, Dad? He glanced at her. She was sitting very straight, backpack still in her lap, because she hadn't put it in the back seat yet, ribbon still pinned to her jacket, and she looked simultaneously 9 years old and about 45. 3, he said. She breathed out through her nose. And you're okay? I'm okay. Ribs are sore, faces... He touched his cheekbone briefly. I'll live. Are you going to the doctor? Tomorrow morning. Tonight, she said. Sadie. Tonight, Dad, because what if a rib is broken and you don't know and it pokes something? She'd read a book about injuries at some point. He was fairly certain it had been the same period when she'd gone through a medical facts phase and had accurately diagnosed his plantar fasciitis from across the kitchen. And she had retained selective information from it in moments like this. Ribs don't poke things unless they're severely fractured, he said. These are not severely fractured. How do you know? Because I've had severely fractured ribs and I know what they feel like. She turned to look at him directly. When? He had walked himself into that one. Deployment, he said, a long time ago. She was quiet again. He turned onto Maple Cross, their street, 2 minutes from home, and the afternoon light was doing the thing it did in October, where it came low through the trees and made everything look slightly amber and unreal. Dad, Sadie said, can I ask you something? You can always ask me something. Were you scared? He thought about the honest answer which he owed her, because he'd made her a promise a long time ago about honesty, and she'd held him to it in ways he hadn't anticipated when he made it. For a second, he said. Before. And then there wasn't time to be. But you did it anyway. Yeah. She looked at her ribbon, touching the edge of it with one finger. That's what I told you courage was, she said. Helping people even when it's scary. I know, Logan said. I remembered. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. She got out of the car and went inside and dropped her backpack by the door, which he normally reminded her to put away properly. And he let it go this time. She went to the kitchen and got herself a glass of water and stood at the counter drinking it. And Logan sat down at the kitchen table, slowly, because the chair height was something the ribs had additional thoughts about. After a moment, Sadie came and sat across from him. She put her water glass down and looked at him with the expression that he'd come to think of as her mother's expression, not the eyes, which were his, but the quality of the attention, the way Anna had been able to look at him like she was reading something written at a depth most people didn't reach. Are you going to have to do that kind of stuff again? Sadie said. I don't plan to, Logan said. That's not what I asked. He looked at his daughter, at the ribbon on her jacket, at the water glass she was holding with both hands, her standard posture when she was nervous about a conversation. I don't know, he said, because it was the honest answer. I don't go looking for it. Today, I didn't have a choice. You could have called someone. There wasn't time. She thought about this, clearly and visibly, the way she thought about math problems, working through it, checking the logic. Okay, she said finally, but you're not going to, go back to being in the Navy or anything. No, he said, absolutely not. Promise? Sadie, I promise. I'm a janitor. I clean windows and fix light bulbs and argue with the maintenance request system. That's my job. You also apparently stopped kidnappings, she said, with a flatness that was so dry he couldn't entirely suppress a smile, which hurt his face, which he deserved. That was a one-time thing. You say that, but you said that the time you stopped the guy stealing Mrs. Patterson's car, too, and also the time with the thing at the grocery store. Those were much smaller things. Dad, you threw a cantaloupe. That was a reflex. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then she stood up and came around the table and hugged him, carefully, with the particular gentleness of someone who knew where it hurt. He'd seen her do this with injured animals, too. The neighborhood cat that had come through the yard with a limp, the bird she'd found near the window. This careful, specific tenderness that she deployed when something she loved was damaged. He put his arm around her and felt the weight of her against his good side, and thought that this was the whole point. This was the entire reason for every decision he'd made in 4 years. Not the dramatic version of it that the day had been, but this exact ordinary moment, his daughter's arm around his waist, the October afternoon coming through the kitchen window, Gerald in the driveway, the backpack by the door that he still needed to remind her about. "I'm making grilled cheese," Sadie said into his shoulder. "You should sit down. You don't have to make dinner." "Dad, you fought 3 people today. Sit down." He sat down. She made grilled cheese with excessive butter the way she liked it, and they ate at the kitchen table while she told him everything about the ribbon, and Marcus Chen's volcano, and what Miss Keller had said, and the complicated social dynamics of who sat with whom at the celebration lunch. And Logan listened to all of it with his full attention, the way he always did, because it was all important, and because he'd learned a long time ago that the moments when a kid wanted to tell you everything were the moments you couldn't get back once they were gone. He put her to bed at 8:30, later than usual because she'd been too wound up to settle, and he sat on the edge of her bed the way he had since she was small, while she told him one more thing, and then one more thing, and then finally ran out of things and went quiet with her eyes still half open. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. The lady whose life you saved today, is she nice?" "Yeah," he said. "She's decent." "Good." Sadie's eyes were most of the way closed now. "She should know she's lucky." "I'll pass it along," Logan said. She was asleep by the time he got to the door. He went to the kitchen and did the dishes and took 2 ibuprofen and sat at the table with a glass of water and his phone, which had accumulated 17 missed calls, 6 text messages from numbers he didn't recognize, and 4 from his sister Carol, who had apparently seen a news report. He called Carol back first because if he didn't, she would call the building and then the police and then possibly drive the 3 hours from Riverside to stand in his kitchen and demand an explanation in person. She picked up on the first ring. "Logan James West." "I'm fine," he said preemptively. "They said on the news, I'm fine. Bruised face, sore ribs, nothing broken. They showed the building. They had footage." Her voice did the thing it did when she was frightened, going slightly higher and faster, the register he'd associated with her since childhood. "They said a Meridian Tower employee intervened in an attempted kidnapping of the CEO. That's accurate. Logan. Carol. I'm sitting at my kitchen table. Sadie's asleep. I'm fine." A long pause. He could hear her breathing evening out from the initial velocity of the call. "You could have called me," she said. "I was dealing with things." "You picked up Sadie." "Yes." "You picked up your daughter before you called your sister." "Carol, she was waiting at school." I know. Another pause. "Is she okay?" "She made me grilled cheese and put me to bed," Logan said. "She's better than okay." Carol made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else. "She's so much like Anna, it breaks my heart sometimes." "I know," Logan said. They were quiet for a moment with that, the way they sometimes were with Anna, not avoiding it, just sitting with it in the way of people who'd been carrying something long enough to know how to carry it without making noise. "Are you really okay?" Carol said, quieter now. "Not the physical stuff. The other thing." The other thing. Carol had her own vocabulary for the other thing, the part of Logan that she'd watched him try to put in a box and lock and bury under 4 years of ordinary life. She'd watched it work, mostly. She'd also been there twice in the first year when it hadn't worked. When the nights got bad and he'd called her at 2 in the morning, not entirely sure who he was anymore, and she'd talked to him through it with the specific patience of a woman who loved her brother and understood that some things don't resolve cleanly. "Yeah," he said. "Actually, yeah, I'm okay. It felt different from before. Cleaner, I think. Smaller stakes, in a weird way, even though the situation was..." He stopped, trying to find the right shape for it. "Before, when I was deployed, the weight of it was enormous. You were carrying mission-critical things, lives of many people things, and it sat on you differently. Today it was just 3 men and a woman who needed help. It felt manageable. Did it feel good? Carol said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. Logan thought about this honestly. Parts of it, he said. The part where it worked, the part where she was safe. He paused. Not the rest of it. Okay, Carol said. That sounds like the right answer. It's the honest one. Same thing with you? She sighed. I want to come up this weekend. Carol, I'm not asking, Logan. I'm telling you. I'm coming up Saturday. I'm bringing the pasta thing Sadie likes. And I'm going to sit in your kitchen and look at your face and make sure you're actually fine, and not just the version of fine you perform for people. He considered arguing and decided it wasn't worth it, and also that he was tired, and that Carol sitting in his kitchen on Saturday sounded genuinely like a good thing. Fine, he said. Thank you. A pause. Get some sleep. Yeah. And Logan, I'm proud of you. Even though you scared me half to death, I'm proud of you. He didn't have a ready answer for that, so he just said goodnight and hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for another few minutes in the quiet of the house. Sadie's breathing audible through her bedroom door, the refrigerator doing its periodic hum, a car passing outside. And then he went to the bathroom and looked at his face in the mirror properly for the first time. It was worse than he'd thought, which was saying something because he'd thought it was fairly bad. The left cheekbone had come up in a deep bruise that was already moving into the purple-red range, and the cut near the eyebrow was small, but had bled more than he'd realized, leaving a faint, dried track down toward his ear. He had a second bruise developing along his jaw that he hadn't noticed at all, which meant he'd taken something there and his body had filed it under a dress later and never gotten back to him. He cleaned the cut. He took 2 more ibuprofen. He went to bed. He lay in the dark for a while, thinking about what Carol had asked. Did it feel good? And the honest answer he'd given her. He turned it over in the quiet and looked at it from different angles, the way he sometimes did with things he wasn't sure about. He didn't miss the life. He wanted to be clear with himself about that. He didn't miss the deployments or the weight of mission-critical things or the way it felt to be a person whose primary function was a kind of controlled violence. He'd left that with genuine intention, and he'd meant it every day since. What he'd noticed today was something smaller and more specific. That the training didn't leave. That it sat in the body like a language you'd learned young, dormant maybe, but not gone. That when the situation had demanded it, he'd moved back into it the way you move into a first language after years of speaking a second one, slightly surprising yourself, the words coming before the conscious thought. He didn't know how he felt about that. He suspected the answer was complicated and not something he'd resolve tonight, and so he let it sit and closed his eyes and listened to the house. He slept better than he expected to. The next morning, he took Sadie to school. She inspected his face at breakfast with clinical detachment, decided the bruise was actually kind of impressive, and pinned her ribbon to her backpack rather than her jacket because she wanted to be able to see it while she walked, and then went to the urgent care clinic 4 blocks from the building rather than his regular doctor because the regular doctor would want to schedule, and he wanted this addressed. The nurse practitioner, a woman named Deshawn, who had the pleasant efficiency of someone who'd seen everything and was no longer surprised by any of it, looked at his face and his ribs and his knee and asked how it happened. Altercation, Logan said. Uh-huh. She palpated his ribs with practiced hands, watching his face rather than looking at what she was doing. Deep breath. He breathed. The ribs made their case. He kept his face neutral. 2 are bruised, possibly 1 is hairline, she said. We can do an x-ray, but the treatment is the same either way. Rest, ibuprofen, no heavy lifting for 2 weeks. You know what heavy lifting means? Not picking up my daughter. Not picking up your daughter, she confirmed. How old? 9. She's probably fine walking on her own for 2 weeks. She'll argue. 9-year-olds generally do. She made a note. Your face is ugly, but it'll sort itself out. Butterfly closure on the eyebrow cut. She was already opening a drawer. The knee is soft tissue. Ice it for the next 3 days. 20 minutes on, 40 off. Okay. You're going to be sore for a week. I know. She looked at him, at the bruises, at his general presentation. You're pretty calm about all this. I've been here before, Logan said. Military? Former. She nodded, in the way of someone who received this information and slotted it into existing understanding. "Take care of yourself," she said, and she meant it in the specific way of a medical professional who had seen what happened when people didn't. "The body keeps a running tab, you should know that." "I know that," he said. He left the clinic with a butterfly closure on his eyebrow and a week's worth of ibuprofen dosing instructions and walked the 4 blocks to Meridian Tower because he was scheduled for a shift, and he wasn't someone who called out unless he was actually incapacitated. And he was not, technically, barely, actually incapacitated. The building's lobby was back to normal in the surface sense. The security desk had guards, the elevators were running, the morning foot traffic was moving through in its usual patterns. But there was a quality in the air that Logan recognized, the slightly elevated alertness of a place that had been scared and was pretending not to be. People moved a little more carefully than usual. The security guards were watching the doors more consistently. The front desk staff had the particular posture of people who had decided to project calm, because projecting anything else felt dangerous. Logan signed in and went to the supply closet on the ground floor to get his cart. Dennis was waiting outside the supply closet. This was unusual. Dennis came to find him maybe once every 2 weeks, usually about something that needed addressing on a specific floor or a scheduling matter. He did not, as a rule, wait outside supply closets at 8:15 in the morning. "Morning," Logan said. "How's the face?" Dennis said. "Ugly, but functional." "Come with me for a minute," Dennis said. "Before you start." Logan followed him to the building manager's office, which was a practical space on the second floor with a desk covered in papers and a window that faced the interior atrium rather than the street. And Dennis closed the door and stood rather than sitting, which meant this was going to be brief. "2 things," Dennis said. "First, HR is going to need to do an incident report with you, standard for anything that results in injury on property. I've scheduled it for this afternoon at 2, if that works." "That works," Logan said. "Second," Dennis stopped. He was a man who chose words carefully, and sometimes that process was visible. "Ms. Whitmore called me this morning." Logan waited. "She asked about you, your position here, how long you'd been with us, your arrangement." Dennis paused again. "She also asked whether your compensation was commensurate with her word was expertise." "I'm a janitor," Logan said. "The compensation is commensurate with that." "Yes," Dennis said. "I told her that." "What did she say?" Dennis looked at him with the expression of a man who was relaying a message he wasn't entirely sure how to frame. "She said that sometimes the job title and the job description are not the same thing, and that the company should be paying for the actual person." He cleared his throat. "I don't know exactly what that means in practical terms. I think she does." "Dennis," Logan said, "I like my job." "I know you do. I'm not looking to be—" He searched for the right word. "Repositioned." "I know that too." Dennis picked up a paper from his desk and set it down again, a fidgeting gesture Logan had rarely seen from him. "I just wanted to warn you that she may have something to say to you, directly. She's that kind of person." "I know," Logan said. "I've noticed." Dennis nodded. "Okay. Second floor restrooms need attention. The drain in the men's room has been slow, and I've had 2 complaints." "I'll start there," Logan said. He went to start there. The building moved around him with its usual rhythms, and Logan moved through it in the usual way, and the morning passed in the concrete reality of work, the slow drain addressed, the hallway on the 7th floor that needed an additional pass, the lobby planters that needed the dead leaves cleared before they became an eyesore. He was changing the paper towel roll in the 6th floor men's room at 11:47 when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He almost didn't answer it. Then he looked at the area code, which was local, and answered. "This is Logan." "Mr. West." A voice he didn't recognize, professional and clipped. "I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Whitmore. She'd like to meet with you at your convenience. Today, if possible, in her office. She's available at noon or at 4. Logan looked at the empty paper towel holder. He looked at the replacement roll in his hand. "Noon is fine," he said. He finished the paper towel roll and finished the 6th floor restrooms, and at 11:58 he took the elevator to the 42nd floor, which no longer had investigators in it, but had a different quality than it had yesterday. The quiet of a place that had been through something and hadn't fully processed it yet. The marble had been cleaned properly, he noted. The scuff marks were gone. Someone had come in with the right materials, probably overnight, which he respected. The receptionist, not Priya, a different woman today, which made sense, called ahead and then directed him down the main hallway to the corner office that said, Claire Whitmore, CEO, on the door in clean sans serif lettering. The door was open. He knocked on the frame anyway. Claire looked up from her desk. She was in a different jacket from yesterday, navy blue, and she had a look on her face that suggested she had been in motion since approximately 6 this morning and had not stopped, but that she had decided this particular stop was worth making. Logan, she said, come in, sit down. He sat in one of the 2 chairs across from her desk. The office was large but not ostentatious. The furniture was good but not decorative, the kind of space that had been set up to work in rather than to impress visitors. There were documents on every surface, organized but dense. A framed photo on the far edge of the desk that he didn't look at directly. A half-drunk cup of coffee that was certainly cold. How are your ribs? She said. Bruised, possibly one hairline, treatable. Your face looks worse than yesterday. Bruises peak at 24 hours usually, he said. She looked at him in the assessing way she had, and then she said, I'm going to be direct with you because I think that's what you prefer. It is, he said. The company wants to compensate you for what you did yesterday, Claire said. That's already been decided at a board level, and I'm not here to negotiate it. I'm here to tell you it's happening and ask what form you'd like it to take. I don't want compensation, Logan said. I know, she said. I expected that, which is why I've structured it in a way that isn't really about you. He looked at her. Sadie's college fund, Claire said simply. Whatever institution she chooses, whenever she chooses it, covered. That's the offer. The room was quiet. Logan sat with that for a moment, with the weight of it and what it meant. Not to him, because that was the part he'd learned to hold at arm's length, but to Sadie, who was 9 and who had a future that he'd been quietly worrying about for 4 years in the background frequency way, the same way he worried about everything regarding her, the constant low hum. That's, he started. I'm not finished, Claire said, not unkindly. There's a second part. The Meridian Foundation runs scholarship and mentorship programs in 15 cities. We fund STEM education, job training, housing transition programs. I'd like you to consult with the foundation on one of its programs, specifically the one that provides support for single-parent families navigating employment transitions. She paused. You do it on your own time. It pays a consultant's rate, and it's entirely optional. I'm not making it a condition of anything. Logan looked at her. Why that program? Because you're the best advocate for it I've ever met, she said, and because you probably know what those families need better than anyone on our current advisory board. He sat with that too. And the janitor thing? He said. The janitor thing stays exactly as it is, for as long as you want it, Claire said. I'm not offering you a promotion. I'm not trying to move you into a position that doesn't fit. Dennis tells me you're good at your job and you like your job, and I'm not in the business of fixing things that aren't broken. Dennis said I was good at my job? He said you were the most reliable person on his staff, and that the maintenance request system had improved significantly since you started, which I gathered was a compliment. It was a mess when I got here, Logan said. I know. I'd had 3 complaints about it. He looked at his hands for a moment, at the calluses that were different now from what they'd been 8 years ago. Different work, different origin, but still there. The foundation thing, he said. I'd need to meet with them first, see what they're actually doing, whether it's substantive or just optics. I'd expect nothing less, Claire said. I can set up a meeting for next week. Okay, he said. And Sadie's fund? He looked at her, at the directness of her, the quality of it that he'd noticed the first time she'd asked him if the squeaky wheel drove him crazy. She's going to ask where it came from, he said. Tell her someone at your building recognized that her father was worth investing in, Claire said. That's accurate. He was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. Claire nodded once, the closed-case nod of someone who'd gotten what they needed out of a negotiation and was already thinking about the next thing. But then she paused, and something in her expression shifted into a register that was less corporate and more plain. For what it's worth, she said, I've been in this role for 6 years. I've negotiated nine-figure deals. I've sat across from people who tried to intimidate me in ways that were genuinely creative. I've fired people I cared about and made decisions that kept me up at night. She looked at him steadily. Yesterday was the first time I've been genuinely afraid. I know, Logan said, and the only reason it ended the way it did was you. She said it without drama, just the flat weight of a fact. I need you to know that I understand that. You would have figured something out, Logan said. Maybe, she said, but maybe is a very uncomfortable word in that situation. He almost smiled. Yeah, he said. It is. He stood, and she stood too, and they looked at each other across her desk in the way of two people who had arrived at something that didn't have a clean category and had decided to leave it where it was. Thank you, Logan said, and he meant the Sadie part, and she knew he meant the Sadie part. Thank you, she said, and they both knew what she meant. He walked out of her office and down the hallway with its clean, repaired marble and its properly functioning track lights, and he took the elevator back down to the 6th floor where his cart was waiting outside the men's room. He stood with his hand on the cart for a moment. The left wheel still squeaked. He really needed to fix that. He thought about Sadie, who was in school right now, probably drawing something or arguing a math answer that she was correct about, or sitting at lunch with a ribbon on her backpack, living her ordinary 4th-grade life in the clean, unaware way of children who are safe and loved, and have no reason not to trust that the world will continue to make sense tomorrow. He thought about the foundation program, about the meeting Claire would set up, about whether there was something real there, or whether it would be the kind of well-funded program that served its optics better than the people it claimed to serve. He'd find out. He was good at finding that kind of thing out. He thought about the compact man's face when he'd asked who Logan was, and the answer Logan had given, and the truth of it that only got clearer over time. He was a father. That was the primary fact of him. Everything else, the training that lived in his muscles, the instincts that hadn't rusted out, the language his body still spoke fluently after 4 years of silence, all of that was secondary, contextual, available when needed and otherwise set aside. He pushed his cart toward the elevator. The left wheel squeaked down the 6th floor hallway, and the sound of it was familiar and ordinary and exactly right, and Logan West went back to work. The story broke properly on Thursday. Logan had known it was coming. The news van outside the building on Wednesday had been the first signal, and the second had been the way his phone kept lighting up with numbers he didn't recognize, which he kept not answering, and the third had been Dennis pulling him aside on Wednesday afternoon to tell him that 2 journalists had called the building's main line asking for a statement about the employee who had intervened in the kidnapping attempt. Dennis had given them nothing, which Logan appreciated. Building management had issued a brief corporate statement confirming that an employee had assisted in preventing a security incident and that the matter was under investigation, which was accurate and said nothing and was exactly right. But Thursday morning, Logan dropped Sadie at school and turned on the radio in Gerald on the way to work and heard his name. Not his full name, not at first. They said a building employee identified as Logan West. But they said it, and they had details that were specific enough that someone had talked, probably someone on the executive floor who'd been behind a glass door watching and had a friend in media. And now it was out, and the shape of the story was already forming in the way that stories formed when they got into the news cycle. Simplified, dramatized, stripped of the parts that didn't fit the arc. Former Navy SEAL working as janitor saves CEO from kidnapping. That was the headline. He heard it twice before he parked Gerald. He sat in the parking structure for a moment with the radio off, in the quiet, and breathed. His ribs were better today. The ibuprofen was doing its job and he'd slept on his right side, which helped. And his face had hit full color, the bruise a deep purple green that had passed through dramatic and was heading toward merely ugly. He thought about Sadie hearing that headline, about Miss Keller mentioning it, or another parent, or one of the kids who had older siblings who paid attention to the news. He thought about the specific conversation that would require and felt tired in advance of it. He went to work. By 9 o'clock, there were 2 journalists in the lobby. Logan knew this because Priya, back at her desk, outwardly composed, though she'd told Logan when he'd stopped to check on her that she'd been having trouble sleeping, had called down to Dennis to report them, and Dennis had called Logan directly to say stay on the upper floors if you can manage it in the tone of a man managing a situation he hadn't been trained for. Logan stayed on the upper floors. He was in the middle of the 38th floor hallway, addressing the elevator track seal that he'd submitted the maintenance request about twice and which had finally been approved when he heard footsteps that weren't building staff. He knew building staff footsteps by now. The pace, the weight, the direction of purpose. These were different. He turned. The man who'd come off the elevator was in his early 40s, well-dressed in the way of someone who spent a lot of time in front of cameras without wanting to appear to have made an effort. He had a phone in his hand and a practiced openness in his expression that Logan recognized as the professional version of approachability. "Mr. West," the man said. "You're not supposed to be on this floor," Logan said. "I know. I apologize. I told the lobby I had an appointment with." "You told them something that wasn't true," Logan said, "which means you need to go back down." The man stopped. He had the specific recalibration of someone who had expected a different response, warmer, more surprised, more amenable to the moment. He shifted his approach. "I'm David Carr. I'm with Channel 7 News." "I know what Channel 7 News is," Logan said. He picked up his tools and moved them back to his cart. "I'm going to walk you to the elevator." "Mr. West, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. The public is genuinely interested in your story. What you did 2 days ago was remarkable, and people deserve to hear it from you directly rather than from secondhand sources." Logan pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He gestured. Carr didn't move. "Is it true you were a Navy SEAL?" "Elevator," Logan said. "Were you trained specifically for situations like this? Do you feel that your background—" "Mr. Carr." Logan looked at him directly. "I'm going to ask you one more time to get in the elevator, and if you don't, I'm going to call building security, and they're going to escort you out, and your network is going to get a call from legal, which is going to be a worse story for you than the one you came here for." Carr looked at him, looked at the elevator, looked at his phone, then back. "Can I at least leave you my card?" he said. Logan said nothing. Carr put a business card on the edge of the cart, gently, like he was making a peace offering, and got in the elevator. The doors closed. Logan picked up the business card and put it in his pocket because leaving it on the cart felt unnecessarily hostile, and went back to the elevator track seal. By 11 o'clock, Dennis had called twice more. The building's PR contact, a woman named Linda Forsyth, whom Logan had never met in person, had apparently been in a crisis communications meeting since 8 that morning and wanted to know Logan's preference regarding media requests. Dennis had relayed this in the careful tone of a man who was trying very hard to be neutral about it. "My preference," Logan said, on the phone in the supply closet with the door shut because it was the quietest space available, "is that there are no media requests." "Linda thought you might say that," Dennis said. "She wants to know if that's a permanent position or a temporary one." "Permanent," Logan said. A pause. "She's also going to want to discuss the possibility of a joint statement from you and Ms. Whitmore. Something brief, something that—" "No," Logan said. Another pause. "Logan?" "Dennis?" "I understand there are communications pressures here. I understand the company has a narrative it needs to manage, and I'm currently an uncontrolled variable in that narrative. I get it. But I'm not giving a statement, I'm not doing an interview, and I'm not standing next to Ms. Whitmore in front of cameras. I did what I did, and it's done, and I'd like to go back to being someone nobody writes stories about." Dennis was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll tell Linda." "Thank you." "The track seal on 38, is it fixable or does it need a replacement part?" "Fixable," Logan said. "I'll have it done by 2. "Good." A pause. "Logan, for what it's worth, and I know you don't need my opinion on this, I think you're handling it right." Logan hadn't expected that from Dennis. "Thanks," he said. He finished the track seal by 1:45 and ate his lunch on a bench in the building's interior courtyard, which was a glass-enclosed space on the 4th floor that most of the building's occupants didn't know existed because it wasn't on any of the official floor maps, and the entrance was unmarked. Logan had found it in his second week when he'd been looking for where the exterior drainage connected to the interior system, and he'd been eating there once or twice a week ever since. It had a tree in it, an actual tree. A Japanese maple that someone had planted years ago and that had gotten larger than the space probably intended, its upper branches pressing against the glass ceiling, and 4 concrete benches and a fountain that didn't work but still had water in it from the last rainfall that had come through the roof drainage. He ate his sandwich and looked at the maple and thought about Thursday and what it meant that his name was now attached to a headline that would follow him in search results for years. He wasn't angry about it exactly. Anger required a target, and the journalist had been doing his job, and the people on the executive floor who'd talked to the press had probably done it without malice. Just the natural human impulse to share something remarkable that they'd witnessed. He didn't blame any of them. He was tired of it. That was the more accurate thing. Tired of the way the story simplified him, former Navy SEAL, as if that were the primary fact, as if the 4 years after it were a footnote rather than the main text. Tired of being remarkable in a context he'd spent 4 years trying to leave. Tired of people looking at him with that expression the one Carr had been wearing in the hallway, the one that wanted something from him he wasn't able to give because what it wanted was a version of him that didn't exist anymore. His phone buzzed. He looked at it expecting Dennis or Linda Forsythe's assistant. It was Sadie's school number. He picked up immediately. "Mr. West?" The voice was female, professional, slightly careful. "This is Janet Hollis. I'm the assistant principal at Ridgeline. I wanted to call you directly because we've had a couple of situations today that involved Sadie, and I think it would be helpful if we spoke." Logan's sandwich was back in its bag. "What kind of situations?" "Nothing serious," Janet said quickly. "Sadie is fine. She's in class right now. But 2 things happened. First, a parent dropped off their child this morning and recognized Sadie as your daughter and told several other parents in the parking lot, and word has gotten around to some of the students. Second," she paused, "a journalist came to the school entrance at approximately 10:30 and asked to speak with Sadie." Logan was already standing. "We did not allow it," Janet said. "Our policy is clear and we followed it absolutely. The journalist was turned away and we've alerted our security team, but I wanted you to know." "How is Sadie taking it?" Logan said. His voice was level. It took some effort. She's remarkably composed. Several classmates asked her about it this morning, and she told them, quote, "My dad doesn't want to be on the news, and neither do I, so we're not talking about it." And then she went back to her assignment. A pause that contained something that might have been impressed. "She's a very self-possessed kid, Mr. West." "I know," Logan said. "Did she seem upset?" "Honestly? No, she seemed a little annoyed, which I think is appropriate." Another pause. "I wanted to make sure you knew, and to let you know that we're going to make sure no one accesses her without your explicit consent. If anything changes, I'll call you immediately." "Thank you, Ms. Hollis." "Of course. Pickup is at the usual time. We'll have her come out the side entrance today, just to be safe." He hung up and stood in the interior courtyard with the Japanese maple pressing against the glass above him and breathed through his nose for a moment. A journalist had gone to his daughter's school. He picked up his lunch bag and his coffee and walked back inside and went up to the 42nd floor because it was the one place in the building where he had a reason to go that also happened to be where Claire Whitmore's office was, and he had something to say. Her assistant, the regular one, a sharp-eyed man named Patrick, who had been with Claire for 3 years and who Logan had always gotten along with in the way of 2 people who dealt in practical realities, looked up when Logan came off the elevator and read his face immediately. "1 second," Patrick said. He picked up the phone, said 2 sentences, and hung up. "Go ahead." Logan knocked on the open door and went in. Claire looked up. She took in his expression and was on her feet before he'd said a word. "What happened?" she said. "A journalist went to Sadie's school this morning," Logan said. He said it flat, just the fact of it, without the anger that was sitting underneath it, because the anger wasn't useful here. Claire's face went through something that Logan didn't have time to fully read, but that included, clearly, something sharp and immediate. "Sit down," she said. "I'd rather stand." "Logan, sit down." Not an order, just a steadying. He sat. She came around to the front of her desk and leaned against it, which put them at close range and the same level, and looked at him directly. "Tell me everything." He told her. The school called, the journalist at the entrance, Sadie's composed response to her classmates, the side entrance pickup. When he finished, Claire was quiet for a moment with the quality of quiet that preceded action rather than following it. "This is my fault," she said. "It's not your fault. The story exists because of me, because of what happened to me in this building. If I hadn't—" She stopped. "That's not a productive line of thinking. What do you need?" I need it to stop, Logan said. Whatever the company can do on the communication side to redirect attention away from me and toward the investigation, or the security protocols, or literally anything else, I need that done. Linda can do that, Claire said. She's good at redirecting narratives. I'll talk to her today. She looked at him. What about Sadie? She's okay. She told her classmates she didn't want to talk about it and went back to her work, Logan said. Claire looked at him with an expression that was difficult to name, something between admiration and pain. The look of someone recognizing a quality in another person that they wish they had access to more easily. She sounds like someone who knows exactly who she is. She gets it from her mother, Logan said, and then felt the slight surprise of having said that to Claire Whitmore, whom he didn't know well, but who had a quality that made certain things easier to say than they ought to be. What was her mother like? Claire asked. Not prying, asking because she was a person who asked things directly and who listened to the answers. Logan thought about Anna, about how to compress her into an answer that fit the room and the moment. She was calm in a way that I'm not, he said, not passive. She had strong opinions about most things, and she didn't hesitate to say them, but she wasn't easily rattled. She could walk into a situation that was tense, and the tension would just reduce somehow, like she lowered the frequency of it by being there. He paused. Sadie does the same thing. It's not something I taught her. She was born with it. Claire was quiet for a moment. You must have been a good team, she said. We were, Logan said. It landed gently, and they left it there. I'll call Linda right now, Claire said, straightening. And Logan, the journalist at the school. Do you know which outlet? No. I'll find out. There are things we can do on that front as well. He nodded and stood. One more thing, Claire said. She went back behind her desk and opened a drawer and took out an envelope, which she set on the desk and pushed toward him. This is for you. Not Sadie's funds, and that's already been processed through the foundation separately. This is something different. Logan looked at the envelope but didn't pick it up. It's not large, Claire said. It's a hazard pay designation, retroactive, which HR signed off on this morning. It's within the company's existing compensation policy for situations involving personal risk to employees on property. She paused. It's not a reward. It's just accurate accounting of what happened. He picked up the envelope. He didn't open it. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. It's owed. He put the envelope in his jacket pocket and left her office and went back to work, because the day wasn't done and the 31st floor windows needed attention, and there was a tile situation in the lobby restroom that he'd been putting off, and he wanted to have it addressed before the end of the week. He didn't open the envelope until he was back in the interior courtyard at the end of his shift, sitting on the concrete bench with the Japanese maple above him and the broken fountain beside him, and the light going golden through the glass ceiling the way it did at 4:30 in October. It was enough to fix Gerald's transmission, which had been making a sound for 3 months that he'd been budgeting mentally around. It was enough for a new winter coat for Sadie, who had outgrown last year's and was currently wearing one that fit her like a slightly deflated sleeping bag. It was enough for 4 or 5 months of breathing room in the account he kept for emergencies, which he'd been keeping thinner than he liked. He put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in his jacket and sat for a moment with the maple and the broken fountain. He thought about a version of himself, not far away, not from another life exactly, just a different angle on the current one, who might have found all of this uncomfortable. The money, the recognition, the obligation of Claire's attention, and the foundation meeting next week, and the narrative that was now attached to his name in a way he couldn't entirely control. He thought about that version and acknowledged it and let it sit. Then he thought about the side entrance at Ridgeline Elementary and his daughter coming through it at 3:15 with her ribbon on her backpack, annoyed and composed and perfectly herself. He picked up his things and went to get his daughter. She was waiting at the side entrance with Maya Osei, her best friend since first grade, and they were deep in a conversation that appeared to involve a drawing Maya was showing her on a piece of notebook paper. And when Sadie spotted Gerald pulling up, she said something to Maya and waved and came to the car with the easy stride of someone whose day had been largely fine. She got in. She looked at his face, the bruise, which was now entering the yellow-green phase of its life cycle, and said, "It's looking better." "You think?" "Less like you lost and more like you won a while ago," she said, with the particular confidence of a 9-year-old delivering aesthetic judgments. Someone came to your school today, Logan said. He wanted to be the one to say it, not to have it surface sideways. I know, Sadie said. She was putting on her seatbelt with the focus she gave mechanical tasks. Ms. Hollis told me. She said they weren't allowed in. They weren't. Good. She settled back. I told the kids in my class I didn't want to talk about it. I heard. Ms. Hollis told me. Did I do the right thing? He pulled out onto Ridgeline Avenue. Yeah, he said. You did exactly the right thing. She nodded, satisfied. Marcus Chen said his dad saw your name on the news and that you were famous now. She said famous in the particular tone she used for concepts she found slightly ridiculous. I told him you weren't famous, you were just private, and famous and private were opposites. That's accurate, Logan said. He said that's the same thing celebrities say when they're famous. Marcus Chen has a sophisticated media analysis for a 9-year-old. He's annoying about it, Sadie said. Logan almost laughed, which his ribs noted. Can I ask you something? Yeah. Does it bother you that people know? At school, I mean. Sadie was quiet for a moment in the real way. Not the processing way, but the way that meant she was taking the question seriously. Kind of, she said. Not because of what you did. I think what you did was right. She looked out the window. It's more like, before, you were just my dad who cleaned the building. And now people look at me like I'm supposed to be different because of what you did. And I don't feel different. I feel like I'm just me, and you're just you, and we're just us. Logan drove. You're just you, he said, and I'm just me. None of that changed. I know, she said. I just wanted you to know that I know. He looked at her for a second, sideways, at her profile in the afternoon light. The small nose she'd gotten from Anna, the set of her jaw that was his, the ribbon still pinned to her backpack, which was on her lap. We're okay, he said. I know we are, she said, with the simple confidence of someone who had never seriously doubted it, which was everything Logan had been working toward for 4 years. Carol arrived Saturday morning with a Dutch oven full of her pasta situation, which Sadie immediately called dibs on before Carol had gotten through the door. And the three of them ate lunch at the kitchen table while Carol asked Sadie about the ribbon and the science fair, and whether Marcus Chen's volcano had been as bad as Sadie had suggested. And Sadie gave a thorough technical breakdown of why a baking soda volcano was insufficient as a science fair project. And Carol listened with the concentrated attention of someone who genuinely loved this child and enjoyed every sentence she produced. After lunch, Sadie went to her room to do the drawing she'd been thinking about all week, a detailed illustration of the solar system that she'd been planning since the ribbon win inspired her. And Carol and Logan sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the comfortable quiet of siblings who'd known each other long enough not to need to fill it. Your face, Carol said, looking at it directly for the first time. I know. The yellow-green phase, she said. That's the worst. Sadie says it looks like I won. Carol smiled, and it went to her eyes. Of course she does. She held her coffee with both hands. How are you, actually? Actually, Logan said. He thought about it. I think I'm okay. In a way that feels real, not performed. That's different from before, Carol said. It is, he said. He turned his cup in his hands. When it happened in the moment, I wasn't afraid. I was just operating. And afterward, I kept waiting for it to hit wrong, the way it used to when I'd come back from something. That specific crash, he paused. It didn't come. Why do you think that is? He was quiet for a moment. Because I knew why I was doing it, he said. Before, in the field, the purpose was always complicated. Mission parameters, geopolitical objectives, chain of command decisions I'd never fully understand. The purpose was real, but it was distant, abstract. He looked at his hands. Tuesday I was trying to get home to Sadie. That's it. The why was right there in my pocket. I could feel the weight of it. Carol was quiet, listening. I think that makes it sit differently, he said. In the body. In the afterward. Carol set down her coffee. She reached across the table and put her hand on his forearm, briefly, the way she had when they were kids and she was the older one and he'd been scared of something. A way of saying, I'm here without making it large. Anna would have had something to say about Tuesday, Carol said. Yeah, Logan said. She would have had several things to say. What's the first one? He thought about it. About Anna's voice, which he could still hear clearly, which he suspected he would always be able to hear clearly, which was a gift and an ache in equal measure. She'd say I should have fixed the squeaky wheel before any of this happened, he said. She had very specific opinions about deferred maintenance. Carol laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and it filled the kitchen, and from somewhere down the hall they could hear Sadie humming to herself while she worked on her solar system, an unidentifiable tune that she'd been humming for weeks, and the kitchen smelled like Carol's pasta and coffee and the specific warm smell of their particular apartment in October, and Logan sat with all of it and let it be exactly what it was, which was enough, which had always been enough. He just hadn't always been able to see it. On Monday morning, he got to work early enough to take the cart to the maintenance room and properly address the left wheel. It took 11 minutes, a specific wrench, and the replacement bearing he'd ordered and forgotten about on the shelf. And when he tested it in the hallway outside the maintenance room, it ran smooth and silent the whole length of the corridor. He stood there for a moment, pushing the cart back and forth, listening to the absence of the squeak. It was a small thing, an absurdly small thing given the week he'd had. But he'd been meaning to do it for 6 weeks, and now it was done, and there was a particular satisfaction in that which he didn't think needed analyzing. He loaded the cart with the day's supplies and took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The investigation closed on a Wednesday, 5 weeks after the morning Logan had walked out of the supply closet and into something he still didn't have a clean word for. Detective Reyes called him at 7:15, just after he'd dropped Sadie off, while he was sitting in Gerald in the school parking lot watching the last of the morning drop-off traffic clear out. She was professional and brief in the way she'd been professional and brief every time they'd spoken, which had been 3 times total, once at the scene, once for a formal follow-up interview, and now this. The 3 men were Ukrainian nationals with documented ties to a private intelligence firm operating out of Warsaw. The firm had been contracted. Reyes used the word contracted with the careful neutrality of someone reading from a legal document, by a competitor of Meridian's, a rival company in the middle of a hostile acquisition attempt that had been going badly for them, and the plan had been to extract Claire and use her as leverage in the negotiation, not harm her, use her, which Reyes delivered as if it were meant to be reassuring, and which Logan received with the understanding that the distinction mattered legally, and not much otherwise. All 3 men were in federal custody. The investigation had been transferred to a joint task force involving the FBI and the State Department, which was above Reyes's level and which she acknowledged flatly without any apparent resentment about it. "You'll be contacted by the federal team for a formal statement," she said, "probably in the next 2 weeks. It should be straightforward. Your account has been consistent and the footage corroborates everything." "Okay," Logan said. "The competing company's CEO was arrested in Germany on Tuesday. That'll be in the news today." "I'll avoid the news," Logan said. A pause. "That's probably smart," Reyes said. Then in a slightly different register, less official. "How are you doing?" "Fine," Logan said. "Better." "Your daughter?" He was mildly surprised she asked. "She's good. Back to normal. She's annoyed that Marcus Chen is still bringing it up at school." Reyes made a sound that was the most relaxed thing he'd ever heard from her. "Keep being boring," she said. "That's my professional advice." "That's the plan," Logan said. He sat in the car for another minute after she hung up, watching a pigeon work at something on the sidewalk across the street with the focused determination of an animal that had one job and was committed to it. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of November day that felt clean after a hard October, and Gerald's heater was doing its imperfect best, closed. The words settled into him like something finally exhaled. He'd been holding the shape of the investigation in the back of his mind for 5 weeks. Not anxiously, just aware of it, the way you're aware of a window you left open, somewhere in the house, a low background awareness that something was still in motion. Now it wasn't. The federal team would want their statement and he'd give it, and that would be the last official piece of it, and then it would be a thing that had happened and been resolved and could live in the past where things that had happened belonged. He drove to work. The 42nd floor had changed in 5 weeks, though not in ways that were visible to anyone who didn't pay the kind of attention Logan paid. The security presence was different, more consistent, more thorough, a contracted firm that Claire had brought in while the building's internal security protocol was being overhauled. The new guards were good, the professional kind, and they'd acknowledged Logan on his first day back with the specific nod of people who'd been briefed on who he was and had filed him under a different category than the one his uniform suggested. He appreciated that they didn't make a thing of it. The executive floor itself had a slightly altered quality in how people moved through it. The doors stayed open a little less. People looked up when the elevator arrived, a half-second of attention before settling back to whatever they were doing. It wasn't paranoia exactly. It was the recalibrated awareness of a place that had learned it wasn't exempt from certain things, which was actually a healthier state than the unexamined assumption it had replaced. Priya was back fully, and she had stopped starting slightly when the elevator opened unexpectedly, which had happened in the first 2 weeks. She'd told Logan one afternoon when he was replacing the kitchen supply stock and she'd come in for coffee that she'd been seeing a therapist. "It helps," she'd said, in the tone of someone who'd been skeptical of that fact before testing it. "I didn't think it would, but it does." "Good," Logan had said. "Did you ever, after your deployments, did you do anything like that?" He'd thought about the honest answer. "Not formally," he said. "I probably should have." She'd nodded, filing that away. "Well, better late than never, I guess." "Yeah," he'd said. "That's one way to look at it." He thought about that conversation now as he made his rounds, because it was one of the things the 5 weeks had clarified. The ways in which the event had rippled outward to people he hadn't fully considered in the immediate moment. Priya, who'd sat frozen at her reception desk with her hands carefully folded and had been carrying the weight of those 40 seconds ever since. The executive assistants who'd been behind glass doors watching. The board members who'd been in the conference room and had heard the sounds from the hallway and not known, for several long minutes, what those sounds meant. Logan had not been responsible for their experiences, but they'd happened in the building he worked in, on a floor he was responsible for, and the awareness of them sat with him in a way that wasn't guilt. He knew the difference, but was something adjacent to it. A kind of reckoning with the blast radius of a thing. He was refilling the paper supply in the executive hallway printer at 11 o'clock when Claire came out of a meeting and spotted him and changed her direction without breaking stride, which had become their pattern over the 5 weeks. She moved through the floor with purpose, and when she had something to say, she said it directly, and when she didn't, she left him alone, which suited him. "The Kowalczyk acquisition fell through," she said, stopping beside him. She said it like she was reporting the weather, but her shoulders had dropped 2 degrees, which meant it mattered. "Is that the competing company?" "Former competing company," she said. "Their CEO is in federal custody, and their board is in crisis, and their acquisition strategy is effectively dead." A pause. "I should feel something about that, I think. Relief, maybe." "Do you?" Logan said. "Not really," she said. "I feel tired." She looked down the hallway at her office, at the stack of things waiting on her desk that were visible through the glass. "I've been told I should feel triumphant. Several people have used that word. My PR team, 2 board members, my brother." "Triumphant is a big word for surviving something you didn't choose," Logan said. She looked at him. "That's exactly what I told them." He stacked the paper supply in the printer's side drawer. "The investigation closed this morning," he said. "Reyes called me. Federal case now." "I know. Their team called me yesterday." She was quiet for a moment. "It's over then." "The formal part," Logan said. "Right." She looked down the hallway again. "The rest of it takes longer." "Yeah," he said. "It does." They stood together in the hallway for a moment in the way they occasionally did. 2 people who had been through something together and carried different pieces of it, standing near each other in the ordinary, ongoing space of work. "The foundation meeting is next week," Claire said. "Tuesday at 2, if that still works for you." "It works." Daniel Hess runs the single-parent employment program. He talks a lot, and he means well, and some of what he's built is genuinely good. But there are parts of it that are designed around the experience of poverty as an abstract concept rather than a lived one, and I think those parts don't function well. She glanced at him. "I want you to tell him that, directly. He's been hearing from people who need his funding, and so he hears polished need, curated struggle. I want him to hear from someone who doesn't need anything from him." "You think I'll be blunt enough?" Logan said. I think you're constitutionally incapable of being otherwise, she said, and it wasn't a criticism. I'll be there Tuesday, he said. She nodded and went back to her office and her waiting stack of things, and Logan took the empty paper packaging to the recycling station and continued his rounds. The foundation meeting on Tuesday was held in a conference room on the 14th floor that the Meridian Foundation used for its working sessions. Less formal than the executive rooms upstairs, round table, mismatched chairs that someone had tried to make uniform with cushions, a whiteboard with the remnants of a previous meeting's notes still ghosted on it despite having been erased. Daniel Hess was 50, compact, with the energy of a man who had been passionate about something for long enough that the passion had become indistinguishable from his personality. He shook Logan's hand with both of his and said he'd been looking forward to this, and Logan believed him, which made it easier. There were two other people at the table, a program coordinator named Tasha, who took notes and occasionally corrected Daniel's statistics with the gentle persistence of someone who'd been doing this for years, and a younger man named Eli, who was apparently both a program alum and a current junior staff member, which Hess mentioned in the tone of someone citing his best evidence. They talked for almost 2 hours. Logan had expected to spend most of it listening, but Hess was the kind of person who asked real questions and then actually waited for the answers, which was rarer than it should have been. He asked about the specific friction points in employment transition for single parents. Not the obvious ones, the resume gaps and the childcare costs, but the ones that lived underneath those, the ones that the program's intake surveys probably didn't capture. Logan told him about the schedule problem. Not the cost of childcare, that was documented, Hess had numbers on it, but the rigidity of it, the way that most job training programs were designed around a Monday through Friday daytime schedule that was built for people whose lives had daytime availability, and the parents who needed the programs most were often the ones whose availability was least predictable because their support systems were thinnest. When Sadie's sick, Logan said, and she can't go to school and I need to be home with her, I lose a day of work. That's manageable because Dennis is reasonable and I have some flexibility built up. But if I'd been in a training program with attendance requirements, I'd be out. One sick day and I'm out. And when you're trying to build something, getting knocked back to zero is... He stopped, looking for the right word. It changes how you think about trying. After enough times, you stop starting, Hess was writing. So the inflexibility of the program structure acts as a filter that removes the people who need it most. Exactly, Logan said. The people who make it through your program are the ones who could have probably found another way anyway. Not because they're better, just because their circumstances allow more margin for error. Tasha was nodding. That's what the dropout data looks like, she said to Hess. We've talked about this. We've talked about it, Hess agreed. We haven't solved it. What would solve it, Logan said, is making the program modular. Break it into units that don't require consecutive attendance. Let people step out and step back in without losing their place. It's more complicated administratively, but then it actually serves the people it's supposed to serve, Hess said. Yeah. Hess looked at him. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. Why did you take the janitorial job specifically? With your background, military service, skills, you could have gone into security, private sector, consulting, any number of things that paid more. Logan had thought about how to answer this kind of question because it came up more often now, and the real answer was layered in a way that required some decisions about which layer to offer. I needed predictable hours and a clear endpoint to my workday, he said. Security work, consulting, those come home with you. The decisions come home. The weight of other people's safety comes home. He looked at the table. When Sadie goes to sleep at night, I need to be present. Not running scenarios in my head, not carrying something from the day that she can feel on me, even if she can't name it. Kids feel things. She felt things. I needed a job I could put down at the door. Hess absorbed this. That's not something we ask about in intake, he said. What the job needs to feel like from the inside. You should, Logan said. We will, Tasha said, writing. He left the foundation meeting at 4:15 and picked up Sadie at after-school care, where she'd been doing a project involving a significant amount of construction paper and what appeared to be most of a glue stick, and he drove her home and made dinner. An actual dinner, not scrambled eggs, a pasta situation he'd learned from watching Carol make it twice. And they ate at the kitchen table while the November dark came down outside and the kitchen was warm and lit and theirs. Sadie said, Dad, can I ask you something? Always. At school today, we did this thing in social studies where you draw your family tree. And Mrs. Okafor said you can put anyone on it who's important to your family, not just blood relations. She was moving her pasta around her plate, which was what she did when a topic was careful. I put Mom, and Aunt Carol, and you. That sounds right. And then Mrs. Okafor asked people to share one thing about someone on their tree. A pause. I talked about Mom. Logan waited. I said she was a person who made the room calmer just by being in it, Sadie said, and that she was the bravest person I knew because she was scared about being sick, but she didn't act like she was scared. She acted like everything was going to be okay, so me and you would feel okay. She looked up. Is that right? Is that accurate? The kitchen was very quiet. That's exactly accurate, Logan said. His voice was level. He'd had 4 years of practice. Sadie nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. I wanted to make sure I said it right. She ate a bite of pasta. Then Marcus Chen said his family tree had a hockey player on it who was his second cousin twice removed and that he was almost in the NHL. How do you feel about that? Logan said. I feel like second cousin twice removed is a stretch, Sadie said, and the moment passed back into the ordinary evening. But it stayed with Logan after dinner while he was doing dishes and Sadie was at the kitchen table with her homework, the way certain things stayed. Not painfully, just present, like something held in the hand rather than set down. The accuracy of what Sadie had said. Anna had been scared. Logan knew exactly how scared she'd been, because he'd been the one she talked to at 2 a.m. when the performance of Calm was off, and the fear was just the fear, plain and large. She'd been terrified, she'd been angry. She'd been on several occasions completely undone by it in ways that she'd never let Sadie see. And then she'd gotten up the next morning and made Sadie's lunch and driven her to school and smiled at the right times and kept the frequency of the household low and warm because that was what she'd decided to do with whatever she had left. And she'd done it with a consistency that Logan still thought about when he needed to remember what genuine courage actually looked like in practice. He did the last dish and dried it and put it away. Dad, Sadie said from the table. Yeah. I know you don't like being on the news. He leaned against the counter. That's correct. But Marcus Chen said today that everyone at his house thinks you're a hero. His dad said it. She didn't look up from her homework. I didn't say anything because you said not to make a big deal about it, but I wanted to tell you he said that. Okay, Logan said. Does it bother you when people say that? He thought about the honest answer, which he owed her. A little, he said. Not because of them. They mean it well. It's more that the word doesn't fit exactly. He came back to the table and sat across from her. A hero is something you decide to be. What I didn't decide. I just couldn't decide not to. Sadie looked at him. Maybe that's what a hero is, she said. Someone who can't decide not to. He looked at his daughter. At the homework open in front of her, multiplication tables, some things never changed. At the ribbon from the science fair that she'd moved from her backpack to her bookshelf where she could see it from her desk. At the small, serious face that was going to be, Logan was quietly certain, a face that made rooms better just by being in them. Maybe, he said. She went back to her homework. He sat with her at the kitchen table while she worked, the way he had since she was small, doing nothing in particular, just being there, which was the whole point. The only point. The point he'd nearly lost sight of in a previous life and had organized his entire current one around. At some point, he'd need to think about what came next, in the larger sense. The foundation consulting was one piece. He'd been back twice since the Tuesday meeting, and Hess had already started drafting the modular program structure. And there was something satisfying in that, in the slow, practical work of making a thing more useful than it had been. Not dramatic. Not headlines. Just a program that would work better for the people who needed it, built incrementally, meeting by meeting. Claire had asked him, at the end of his last visit to her office, whether he'd ever thought about training people. Not combat training, not anything like that, but the security awareness piece. The pattern recognition, the simple, non-tactical version of what he'd done on the 42nd floor. The ability to notice when something was wrong before it became a crisis. The basic environmental awareness that most people walk through their days without. He'd said he'd think about it. He was still thinking about it. He hadn't decided yet, and he was in no hurry to decide, which was itself a thing he'd learned in 4 years. The value of letting a decision sit until it was ready, rather than forcing it because the space of not knowing felt uncomfortable. He'd spent most of his 20s forcing decisions, moving fast, staying ahead of the stillness. He'd gotten better at the stillness. He thought about what he'd said to Hess about needing a job he could put down at the door. That was still true. Whatever came next, that was the non-negotiable. Sadie's childhood was a specific window that was already 3/8 closed, and he intended to be fully present for what remained of it, without the divided attention of a man whose work followed him home. The training idea, if it became something, would have to fit inside that. He thought it could. A few hours a week, clearly bounded, no on-call, no emergencies. Something that used what he knew without requiring him to be what he'd been. Maybe. He'd see. Sadie finished her multiplication tables and closed her book and announced that she wanted hot chocolate, which was her preferred seasonal pivot from October onward, and Logan got up and made it. The real kind, with milk heated on the stove, not the packet kind, because she'd tried the packet kind once and delivered a verdict that had been final and specific. He handed her the mug and she held it in both hands, which was how she always held hot things. And he made his coffee, and they stood at the kitchen counter together for a moment in the easy silence of people who knew each other well enough not to need to fill every silence, which was something Logan had noticed becoming true over the past year. The way that Sadie had grown, incrementally, into someone he could be quiet with rather than just someone he needed to entertain or reassure. She was becoming herself. It was happening in front of him, in the small daily increments that were invisible individually and visible when he looked back across a year, and it was the most interesting thing he'd ever watched, and he got to be there for it. "Hot chocolate's good," she said. "Milk has to be the right temperature," he said. "Not boiling. You always say that." "It's always true." She leaned against the counter beside him, shoulder to his arm, in the comfortable, unself-conscious way she still had of occupying his physical space, which he knew, because Carol had warned him and because he'd observed it with other fathers and older daughters, would not always be the case, would at some point shift into the appropriate independence of a teenager who needed her own room's worth of space. Not yet. Still this. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. I'm glad you're okay." It was the plainest thing she could have said, and it landed with the weight of exactly that. Plain, direct, fully meant. "Me too, Bug," he said. "Me too." She finished her hot chocolate and went to brush her teeth, and he went through the apartment in the small nightly ritual of checking locks and turning off lights. The same circuit he'd done every night since they'd moved in. A habit so established it didn't require thought. Living room window latch, front door deadbolt, kitchen light off, hallway light left on at half, because Sadie sometimes got up at night and he didn't want her navigating darkness. He stopped in the hallway outside her door, which was half open the way she always left it. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said from inside. She was already in bed, the sound of her voice carrying the slight underwater quality of someone almost horizontal. "Good day," he said. A pause. The nightly question, the nightly accounting. "Pretty good," she said. "The pasta was better than last time." "That's a low bar." "You're improving," she said generously. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, Sadie." He went to his own room and sat on the edge of his bed in the dark for a moment. Not for any particular reason, just the small pause between the day and sleep, the seam between one and the other. He thought about 5 weeks ago. About the elevator doors opening and 3 men stepping out and something in his peripheral awareness filing the wrongness of it before his conscious mind had caught up. About the supply closet in the dark and his hand on the shelf. About the photo on his phone, blue ribbon, gap-toothed grin, the word exceptionally looked up and deployed with satisfaction. He thought about what it had cost and what it hadn't cost, and the thin, precise line between those two things that he'd somehow walked without falling off either edge. He thought about Anna, who had not been afraid of hard things, who had faced the hardest thing imaginable, and done it with her face turned toward her daughter, and her fear kept private, and her love made visible, and who had left him with the most important work of his life, and the person he most needed to be, and the knowledge, somewhere bone deep, of what mattered enough to protect. He thought about Sadie on her 9th birthday, 18 months ago, when she'd given him the braided bracelet she'd made at camp, red and blue, slightly uneven, absolutely permanent on his wrist since the moment she'd put it there. She'd said very seriously, "It means I'm always with you even when I'm not with you." He'd said he understood. She'd said, "No, I mean really, Dad. It's not just symbolic, it's..." And she'd searched for the word and eventually settled on connected, because she didn't have the word tethered yet, but she meant something in that neighborhood. He turned the bracelet on his wrist in the dark. Connected. Yeah, that was the whole thing, really. When you stripped everything back, the training and the history and the headline and the complicated aftermath and the meetings and the investigations and the media vans and all of it, when you got underneath all of that to the actual load-bearing structure of the thing, it was just that. He was connected to his daughter. She was connected to him. And that connection was the reason he'd walked out of the supply closet, and the reason he'd come home safe. And the reason that both of those things had to be true simultaneously, always, without exception. Not heroism, not duty in the abstract, not the mission or the oath or the training or any of the things that had defined him in the years when he'd been someone else. Just that his daughter was in the world, and he intended to be in it with her, and anything that threatened either side of that equation was something he would address with everything he had, and then he would put it down and come home. He lay down. The apartment was quiet. The hallway light was on at half. Gerald was in the parking garage 2 blocks over with a repaired transmission and a functioning heater and no squeaky wheel because that had been attended to, and some things, when you finally got to them, were simpler than you'd expected. The November night was doing its thing outside. Cold, clear, the city making its constant low noise that was different from country quiet, but was still, after 4 years, his quiet, the specific sonic texture of home. Logan West, 32 years old, former Navy SEAL, current janitor, father, closed his eyes. He had a shift at 7. He had a follow-up meeting with the foundation on Thursday. He had a federal statement to give at some point in the next 2 weeks that he was not worried about. He had Sadie's winter coat to buy, which she'd circled in a catalog with the focused consumer energy of a child who had identified what she wanted and was now on a sustained campaign. He had a note on his phone to ask Dennis about whether the building's maintenance request system could be further streamlined now that he'd been in it long enough to see the structural inefficiencies. He had ordinary things, specific things, the accumulated practical weight of a life he'd built carefully and deliberately out of the materials that had remained after the hardest years. He had the hallway light at half. He had the bracelet on his wrist. He had a daughter asleep down the hall who had told him he was improving at pasta and meant it as the compliment it was. He had kept his promise. He had come home. That was the mission. It had always been the mission, the one that outlasted all the others, the one that didn't end with a debrief or a handshake or commendation folded into a drawer somewhere. It just continued, day by day, school pickup by school pickup, grilled cheese by grilled cheese, multiplication table by multiplication table. No finish line, no medal. No one standing at the door with a statement about your service and what it meant. Just the door itself, and the other side of it, and the light left on so nobody has to walk through the dark. Logan exhaled slowly. He slept.